You're watching News at Prime. Let's get into another discussion. Rise Mzansi leader Songezo accusing the Democratic Alliance leader of, and I quote now, the worst kind of swart gevaar. This is the quote from Songezo. It's in relation to John Steenhuisen's recent warning to the Western Cape electorate that voting for a smaller party will lead to poor service delivery and slow economic growth. Well, Rise Mzansi's national chairperson and the Gauteng Premier candidate, Vuyiswa Ramokgopa, joining me in studio this evening to respond to Mr. Steenhuisen, who hasn't slowed down in his criticism of you. Let's begin with what he has said. I think it was today, in fact. He's been saying these statements over a number of days now. He says, you're no different to parties like the EFF because of your position on expropriation of land. How do you respond?
Well, I think, Oli, just starting with that last point, it's evident that Mr. Steenhuisen struggles with basic comprehension of the South African Constitution and of our law, because the South African Constitution itself permits for expropriation of land under a legal framework and fully detailed and described in the expropriation bill that was recently passed by both houses of Parliament on the 27th of March of this year. So it is evident that not only is Mr. Steenhuisen engaging in poor electioneering, but he's engaging actually in misinformation. And we think that is very dangerous at a time like this. You know, the public already has lost so much trust and so much faith in politicians. And it is actually our responsibility, as those of us who call ourselves leaders in the political space, to be able to be transparent with the public and to speak truth to the public. We can contest and we can engage in the battle of ideas, but spreading misinformation intentionally is completely unacceptable.
So set the record straight. The position of Rise Mzansi pertaining to expropriation of land, yes, you've already pointed out that it is provided for in our constitution, but under what guidelines would such a policy be effected in practice? Because I think that's what South Africans are possibly missing, and that is where the key element is going to come in, because John Steenhuisen, for as long as this position is not cleared, he is going to continue on this trend.
No, absolutely, and with pleasure. So as Rise Mzansi, firstly, we have a manifesto which we have published and detailed our views as far as spatial transformation go. And I use the word spatial transformation because that's really what it's about. It's about enacting spatial justice and being able to have a constructive conversation about land use in our country and land redistribution in our country. And so, as Rise Mzansi, our view is that a program of land reform should be one that ultimately kicks out the most efficient use of land in society, both in an urban and a rural context. And it should also ensure that where there is a need, i.e. where there is a need for housing, where there is a need for infrastructure development, where there is a need for increasing and expanding the rail network, for example. And all of these, by the way, are uses that are well provided for already within our constitutional framework. Our contention is that the mechanisms that we have available to us have not been used adequately, because the ANC has decided to follow a failing, an obviously failed program of land restitution. And land restitution requires you to spend a lot of time trying to trace who the original owners of the land were, what and how were these pieces of land owned. We're saying what the conversation we need to be having is a future-orientated one. We understand that the majority of the population lives in urban areas, and this is where the hunger for land is most urgent. The DA, unfortunately, does not see a need for spatial justice, and it's evidenced by the manner in which they govern in the Western Cape. 30 years into our democracy, you still have people living in apartheid-era townships such as Kailicha, Guguletu, Nyanga, Mitchell's Plain, living under the most horrendous living conditions, as if they are living in in war-torn countries in some instances. So
before you move on from this point,
yeah.
I'm sorry to interject. A few days ago, I had Patricia de Lille, who has previously been mayor of Cape Town for 8 years.
Yeah.
And she accuses the DA of practicing what is called gentrification. And this is something that she is determined to reverse if indeed she were to be elected premier in the Western Cape. How would you deal with that if indeed you had to get sizable support in that province?
So what is evident is that the process of equitable land redistribution and land justice is not one that can be left solely to the markets. This is what kicks out quote-unquote gentrification. However, it's disingenuous for the likes of Patricia de Lille to also stand up and say, I am the solution. She's had many years in government, not only as the mayor of Cape Town, but as the Minister of Public Works. Public Works, which is responsible for the significant holding of land and property within government. She has had ample opportunity to demonstrate what she can do when given the power to do so. And this is why, as Rise Mzansi, we are saying, let us stop this thing of recycling old leaders who have had more than enough time. Patricia de Lille has been in government for almost as long as our democracy has been in existence. She has nothing that she can say she has done substantively to drive and effect spatial justice. And I'm saying, as Rise Mzansi, we are saying we need new leaders, leaders who can come with the vision, who have the political will, and who will not be hamstrung by their affiliations with other parties.
I'm glad you actually led yourself to the next question, because that's what John Steenhuisen is poking fun at you about now, and that is this slogan that South Africa needs new leaders.
Yeah.
He says, well, you only have to look at a few of their leaders, and a good number of them come from the Democratic Alliance, and so there's no new offering here.
Well, I'm not sure who he's referring to, but I will say that it is obvious that in any political party, you are likely to have a mix of people with different political views, especially like a party like ours, which is a party that is able to bring people from different ends of the political spectrum together. We have people that have once been in the likes of AZAPO, some that have been in the DA, etc. But ultimately, Rise Mzansi is a movement that stems from civil society organizations, from community-based organizations, and from ordinary citizens like myself. I myself, as the national chair of Rise Mzansi, have never been affiliated with any political party in any formal capacity. Songezo Zibi, as our national leader, is the same. And there are many, many more in our national leadership collective of 25 people who have never held political office, but have served in their communities and have actually driven change and done things. And so we talk about leadership, not just in the context of people who have led in politics, but we talk about leaders who can understand the complexities of a modern economy, of a country that needs a vision and that needs to navigate very complex social and economic dynamics. And we have brought together a cohort of leaders from different walks of society who we believe are more than capable of executing what both the DA and the ANC have evidently failed to do.
Let's talk coalitions. He talks about a doomsday coalition, and this would come from the ANC, EFF, and possibly the MK party. What is Rise Mzansi's position when it comes to coalitions? Would you go into a coalition with the ANC, for example?
So our view regarding coalitions is one of, let me say, it's underpinned by principle rather than transaction or the need for power and position. This is the first election that we are contesting. We have never, as Rise Mzansi, had an opportunity to test or even identify truly where our base is. We don't even have a single seat in a single council or a single legislature. So our focus has been on spending time making ourselves known to the voters and making them understand what our proposition is. And our proposition is not about bringing parties that are on their deathbed back to life. That is not our proposition. Our proposition is not about rescuing sinking parties who no longer have an ideological value proposition to offer society. Ours is to offer a new way, a third way, to say we don't have to be hamstrung by the political stratification that we've been faced with for the last 3 decades. We need to choose a different path. Now, in saying that, obviously, at some point, if we seek to govern, we will have to be willing to work with other parties. We don't have conditions based on personalities about who we will and will not work with. And I think
you seek to govern. So why are you in this contest?
No, I'm saying, no, of course we do. I'm saying, given that that is the intention, we will inevitably have to find ourselves working across party lines with different people, negotiating and coming to some kind of outcome for the benefit of the public. So it's not for me to say, I will and will not work with this person. It's for me to say, what are we trying to deliver? What outcomes are we trying to deliver for the public? And if we, as a collective of political parties, can bring ourselves together, commit to certain principles like clean governance, like ensuring that we restore service delivery in all of the key municipalities, even though it's a provincial election, but we must make sure that we play that role. And we need to be able to agree to certain criteria that underpin our relationship.
Let me put it to you that you are deliberately being non-committal on coalitions because you have firm positions on questions of land and other issues. On this particular one, which actually does pose a serious challenge, and that is why you have your multi-party charter spearheaded by the Democratic Alliance. The Deputy President of this country was given a mandate by the President to say, lead talks on coalitions.
Yes.
It cannot be that Rise Mzansi does not have a firm position on coalitions. You're trying to pull a fast one, and I'm not going to let you.
I'm not. And this is what I'm saying. Ask me again on the 30th of May what our position is. Because at that point, we will have votes to speak of, and we will be able to say, this is the mandate that we've been given, and this is the room that we have to negotiate with. I cannot stand here and say, I will and will not do this and that. I don't even have a vote. We have yet to be tested electorally as Rise Mzansi. And once we are tested, we will then be in a better position to say who we can and will not work with. And then to that point that you've just made about the multi-party charter, this concept of having pre-election broederbonds, I don't even know what to call it. It's like a pre-election group of friends that are sometimes in coalition but sometimes not. It's a complete falsehood because they themselves know that if the DA were to come out, or any other party were to come out with 51% or whatever, close to that, closer to the time, all of those pre-election agreements will fall apart. The DA themselves has said, and I quote, they have put it in their multi-party charter agreement that no member of the multi-party charter is allowed to go into coalition with the ANC. The same DA last week came out and said they would be willing to work, and they want to actually work with the ANC to prevent them from working with the EFF. So it's quite evident that this whole thing is completely disingenuous, and I'm very grateful that we were not foolish enough to get involved with it.
He seems to rely very heavily, whether it's for purposes of political campaigning, I don't know, but he's relying very heavily on opinion polls that are being conducted right now. And he says that Rise Mzansi is not showing up anywhere. And so what are your chances in the Western Cape, given that this is the space that he would like to secure? Because it's clear that this is one province that is out of the ANC's clutches. And so why would you come for the Western Cape as opposed to trying to rescue, in his words, Gauteng, for example?
So what I find interesting is that despite these opinion polls showing Rise Mzansi having no presence, the DA has allocated significant resources, time and money towards launching a concerted campaign against Rise Mzansi. There are 369 political parties, Xoli, that exist in South Africa. 70 of them are registered nationally. It is quite interesting that the DA feels that this party that is a non-entity and not a threat should be the one that they launch an attack against. So what I would say to you, and I'd say to all South Africans right now. I think these opinion polls are to be taken with a great deal of scrutiny, particularly when they are conducted by people who are conflicted and themselves contesting the election.
Vuyiswa Ramokgopa, let me thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
National chairperson of Mzansi, talking to us about their tiff, if you want to call it that, between themselves and the Democratic Alliance.